we exist as a flow of creativity. That is to say, we are immersed in the showing of the display of the infinite possibilities of patterning. When we look outside, there are trees, the hills, there's an aqueduct there are cars, there are so many things. And we know that they're there because we see them. That is to say, we see shapes which we recognize. We think, that is a tree. In fact, that is a pine tree. And that is a tall pine tree. Therefore, I can impute that it's an old pine tree. And in this way, we spend most of our lives involved in pattern formation, pattern identification. These patterns can be taken as indicating the presence of a true substantial entity, something with an essence of its own. If it's a pine tree, it's not a beech tree. The orders of the world, the patterns and shapes of the world are mutually exclusive. If it's a cup of tea, it's not a cup of coffee. If it's this, it's not that. And that gives a kind of regularity and predictability to how we proceed. When I look out the window and I see the tall pine tree, it is as if, for me, I'm seeing something which is there. The pine tree appears to be self-existing, and I can have some confidence that if you look out the window, you'll see the same tree. That's our normal way of proceeding, that there is a givenness or a facticity to the objects which we encounter, and that our function is purely secondary. We can learn more about pine trees, we can learn about the history of how trees were planted in this area and so on, so that we have a commentary about something. The somethingness of the pine tree is already there. So we are the agents of adjectives and adverbs. We modify and qualify the world that we encounter. We interpret it according to our various tendency of liking and disliking, have more or less knowledge of certain phenomena. But the treeness of the tree seems to be established in itself. But tree, of course, is a word in English. If you were speaking Polish or German, you would use another word. So the very sense of the truth of tree is conventional in our immersion in the English language. It is a conventional term which is applied to something. So if we peel back our projection of the term tree, what do we have? There's a shape. So we say it's tall. It's tall in relation to the bush, which is small. The tree is taller than the bush. How tall is the tree? Is it as tall as some of the new towers they build in London? No. Is it as tall as the hill that's rising behind the village? No. So it's relatively tall. When we look at the trees, we forget the other very tall things in the world, and we concern ourselves with the range of tallness of trees. This is our mind being quite busy. We are doing all of this work of interpretation, of constructing what seems normal, what seems abnormal. So we're bringing a vast, sophisticated interpretive matrix to bear upon whatever we see. And we do it so efficiently that the projection that we have onto the object gives us the sense that the terms which arise in our mind in relation to the tree exist out there rather than in our mind. If we stop saying tree, and we stop saying branch, and we stop saying it's an evergreen, so there's still green needles and so on at the end of the branches, if I stop telling the tree what it is, if I relax my mental activity, something inexpressible is there. If I want to express what is there, I have to begin by projecting onto what is there. The tree doesn't speak. The tree by itself is not saying anything. It's just amazing. I start to form the objects of the world. This car, this is the car that I came in, this is someone else's car. I've met some people here before, and some people maybe I haven't met before. I start to register. Do I have some access to knowledge which I can then project onto other people and build up some picture of them? And when I do that, I can then incorporate them in my sense of how the world is and what's going on. This is work. I'm doing a lot of work. Why I'm doing it? Well, because I'm human. That's what we do. We are very, very busy people. We are ceaselessly creating the world. We're not just doing secondary touches. We're actually creating the trees, because there is no self-existing tree out there. Something is there, but what it is what we invent for ourselves. The what of life is a mental phenomena. And this is the central view in this Tibetan Buddhist tradition of Dzogchen, which is to reclaim the centrality of the mind. Because when we see the world in very dualistic terms, and we see that the field around us, the display around us, is full of separate entities, things which exist in themselves and have their own truth, we become an object among objects. There are all of these people, all having their own lives, their own interests, doing this, that, and the other, and we don't know what on earth it is. And they're all kind of buildings, and people live in these buildings, and they've got this kind of chair or that kind of chair, and why would they have that carpet? People live in most amazing ways, not the way I would live. So other people are other. Houses other than our own are filled with things which belong there, because what would we do with them? So there seems to be a facticity to the object. That is to say, the object formation appears to be truly existing in itself. And when we have that sort of experience, we are kind of returned back into ourselves. We sort of retract into this home base of me living in my body, looking out through my eyes, hearing with my ears, smelling with my nose, so that my senses become the vehicles that give me some access to what's going on out there. My mind is inside me, and the world is outside me. And nowadays people become very interested in the brain and start thinking, well, it's my amygdala that gets me all kind of upset and so on, and I don't want to have too much cortisol. This is a whole new series of concepts which you can use to amuse yourself. You know, I feel very agitated today. That's because I have too much adrenaline. That's a story. In some other cultures, they might say, I feel very agitated today because somebody's put a spell on me, or because it's the new moon day, or it's the anniversary of when my mum died. There could be endless explanations of why things are the way they are. What does that mean? Explanations means the working of the mind. The idea that there is something out there which has already existing with nothing to do with us, and we follow after the fact of the phenomena, keeps us in a state of isolation. Whereas when we start to look around, we see that whatever we see is our interpretation. So we come into a room like this, we look up, we see this huge battery of spotlights, and we have a sense, oh, they must be doing some show, and then we notice there's a stage, and we have some sense of some of the purposes this room might be for. This is because we have an idea of spotlights and stages and performance and so on. We are populating the room with what it appears to already have. So this is a central thing, to try to see, is there a given here which I'm coming after the fact? Okay, well, we can see up close to the ceiling, there's metal rods supporting the spotlights. They were there in the room before we arrived. They appear to be there by themselves. But what were they doing before we arrived? Do spotlights do anything? Do they have a life of their own? They come into existence through our experience of them. They exist for us. When we don't see them, we don't have any real sense that they truly exist. Because if you were coming into this room about to perform on the stage, you might be worrying about your lines. These lamps might be some kind of terrifying implement of torture that was going to illuminate your inadequate preparation. If you're not going to perform, you have a more neutral sense of the lamp. Is your neutral sense more accurate? We say many of these lamps are black in color. They're all plugged in with wires so that the power can go into them when they get turned on. We are saying that. If we were monkeys, we would be very excited because there are many things to swing on. If we were a bat and we flew into the room, it'd be quite difficult to find out how to fly out again. So this could be a terrible prison. We are so used to looking at the world through our educated, encultured, modified way of looking that we take it for granted that our assumptions tell us the truth. But it is relative to our embodiment at this time. 100 years ago, this building would have been functioning in a very different way. There would have been the establishment of social order and who were the mill owners and who were the ordinary workers and so on. These sort of hierarchies are not so important for us nowadays. That is to say, our culture is a shaping and interpretation, and that's what we bring all the time. This is the movement of the mind. This is our mental activity, which includes sensation and feelings and memories and hopes and fears. These patterns are arising and passing and give rise to the transient shapings of our existence. You might arrive here in a sad mood because someone you know is very sick. You might arrive in a happy mood because you've got a weekend to think about meditation and so on. These colorations influence what you can give your attention to. In this room, there are hundreds of thousands of different possibilities of the direction of the gaze. If you came in here with a sketch pad, every time you made a micro move, new vistas would open up, which if you're trying to draw them, would constellate a sense of some truth. But it is impossible for us to capture the whole room. Even if you've got a camera and you keep turning it around, the room itself is ungraspable because all you ever get is a particular take and a particular take. And that take arises in time according to one's own positioning. It's always the room as revealed through the quality of the camera and the direction of the lens. And then we get an image. And we do that, of course, in our embodiment. because I'm looking in one way and many of you are looking in the other way towards me. So you see what's behind me, which I don't see, and I see what's behind you, which you don't see. So only in the most conventional sense can we say we are in the same room together. Being in the same room together is an idea. We all found our way to this art centre this morning, and we've come into this room, and we're here. We look around, we see each other. Oh, yeah, we're all here. That's a flow of ideas. If you stay in your senses directly with whatever is arising for you, that is your unique, particular experience. Nobody else in the room has that same experience, because you're all seated in slightly different ways, looking out at particular vistas. Some people will see a lot of the back of someone's head, some people will see the wall, the windows, and so on. That is what you get, if you like. Being in the room together is what you imagine. That's not what's revealed by your senses. What's revealed by your senses is a unique specificity, the particularity of the lived phenomenological moment. It is the revelation which you are part of. Because as you turn your head, some new vista opens up, you get some contact with someone else's eyes, and things come alive in a particular way. These are the unique moments of our existence, and they are our lives. We are not just some kind of addendum to the world. The world is revealed through our participation in it. And there are two aspects to that. One are the qualities of presence which we bring into a situation, the means by which we can, as it were, milk the cow of existence, how we can get more meaning and richness and depth out of being here. So somebody might have learned something about the history of the building. Somebody might know a lot about stage illumination. And these memory banks would be evoked through the perception of aspects of the room, and that would bring a richness to their engagement. And that's normally what we are concerned with in life, that we tell the story of the world as we encounter it. But we tell the story often in an objectifying way. So the first thing is to see, oh, what I'm getting is what I'm getting. I am part of being here, not just as somebody who walked into the room and will then walk out of the room, but the being here with other people in this room is all a flow of experience. That actually we live in time, and indeed we are time. Time comes through us. Time and location can be abstract and conventional, and therefore distancing. So I could think, I was sleeping in Macclesfield, and I came in a car and came here, and we're a few miles outside Macclesfield. I know where we are in relation to Macclesfield. So this place exists in relation to other places. I'm kind of filling out the picture of where I am. But there is also an immediacy to where I am. I'm just here. And I could think, well, it's probably about 10:30 now, because I've been blethering on for a bit, so that'll be the time. But the time is here. So we have clock time, conventional time, which is relational and is grounded in comparing and contrasting. If I'm in this village, I'm not in Macclesfield. If it's 10:30, it's not 9:30. And so we've got a whole sequence of signs, of signifiers, which we can move around to develop the richness of our narrative, our commentary about what is going on. We're always talking about the situation. But if we just relax that narrative development, we're here. Where is here? Here is here. What is this? It is what it is, which is, for me, from where I'm sitting, a complex patterning of shapes and colors. Now, I can evoke my mental activity to say, oh, some of these shapes are male, some of these shapes are female. Some of these shapes are quite old, some of these shapes look quite young. Some are quite tall, some are quite short. That's me telling something about what is there. The question would be, can I receive what is here as it is? But what is it? It doesn't make any sense. There's just all this stuff. Might feel a bit overwhelmed. But where am I? Oh, I'm in the art centre, Saturday morning. I should know what I'm talking about. Cool. So now we know what's what. That's a storyline. When we are anxious about ourselves, when we are confident about ourselves, these are kind of tropes or particular patternings that allow us to tell stories in particular ways. The question is, if I stop telling the story, what's here? If I stop telling the tree it's a tree, if I stop saying this is an art centre, what is here? We have shape and colour. We have light. What we see is light. We interpret the light in terms of our materialistic notion that this particular shape indicates the presence of a person. We don't see people. We think people. What we see is light. We see shapes and colours. What we see is the potential of the situation, the raw, uncooked quality of the immediacy of manifestation, and then we, we interact with that. We bring our own ingredients, which we mix in with the raw materials of the immediate moment, and out of that we construct our own experience of the room. So some people here might be socially confident and able to chat with lots of people. Other people might be a bit shy and not know really what to do. It's kind of okay sitting in your seat because nobody's asking you what to do, but after a while we have a break and then we have to go and have a cup of coffee. I'd like a cup of coffee, but I don't know what to say to anyone. You can see that in some people's bodies. So their experience of this place is mediated through anxiety. Someone else's experience might be, oh, happy to be here again, see some familiar faces. And so that is our ingredient, which we are adding into the potential of the situation, which gives rise to the unique specificity of our lived experience. We are not dead objects. The mind is the unfolding of experience. That is to say, in relation to our contact with the different people in the room, we find ourselves maybe at ease or a bit anxious. We find ourselves feeling familiarity and warmth, or we find a sense of not quite sure. This just arises, and so we have pulsations of closeness and distance. This is the immediacy of our energetic potential as it encounters other people. Of course, you can try to rectify these vagaries by being polite and being nice, and then you're polite to everyone you meet. Part of the problem with that is you don't actually meet people if you're being polite, because you bring your facade, you bring your persona into relation with the other. And how do you do? Oh, how do you do? Very nice. Very nice to be here. Nice to see you again. Oh, good. This is a kind of meeting of non-meeting. What we actually find, almost as it were through the belly, is that it's easier to respond to some people than to others. We find ourselves expanding or contracting. What does that mean? Well, it means it's quite a complex field of interaction. This is the field of becoming. It's not intentional. it is not something we are doing, but it is a flow of activity, the activity of becoming. I am becoming like this in this moment. And then I'm becoming in another way, in the next moment with someone else. It's not about my mastery, making my life on my terms, but neither is it the mastery of other people subjecting me to their domination so that I have to be the way they want me to be. Rather, it's a co-emergence that we find ourselves being this way or that way in relation to different people at different times. So you might be a bit cagey with someone when you first meet them, and by the time you've had a bit of lunch together, you're chatting away with them, you might give them a hug. Because now how your availability has been opened up allows new forms of movement. This is not very surprising information. This is how our life is. Now we might think, oh, it's because I've got to know the person better. But what we've actually done is to drop some of our wariness, our guardedness, and we allow the connectivity of co-emergence to move together. We find ourselves in it together. It just happens. We're drawn into something. So that puts into question the notion of individual human agency. Well, it's my life. I'm in charge of it. I want my life to go the way I want it to be. That's a storyline. Actually, we find our lives emerging for us in relation to the interaction. So this is the kind of becoming of shared experience. And of course, it's not just with people. If you go out for a walk on the hills, you're walking along, particular contouring, you have a feeling, you turn the corner and suddenly you see an escarpment or you see some slate slide and you have a feeling, oh, this is different. And then an eagle or a buzzard comes across the sky and you feel different, or you see the blackbird suddenly hovering. We're constantly being evoked into particular forms of experience. And from the Buddhist point of view, this is enormously important, that life is our availability. And the various forms of what we might call mental disturbance or difficulties are all problems, or can be seen as problems, of availability. If you become depressed, if you become anxious, if you become agoraphobic, these are all patterns which interrupt your availability to respond to other people. When we're most relaxed in ourselves, when we're most trusting of the world, that is to say, when you've got a sense of belonging, you find yourself allowing yourself to be shaped by events. It's okay. You go out to meet some friends and you're thinking you'll do one thing, but someone else says, no, let's go and do that thing. Okay. And you feel the kind of connective plasticity of your way of manifesting. You become part of the group by giving yourself to the energy of the group. It's not a loss of your existence. You're there, but not on your terms. This is, a key situation developmentally when children are going to play school or primary school. They have to find a way into being in the playground with other kids. They have to be able to have some sense of their own groundedness, but they also have to be available in plasticity. And it's the balancing between being present, being available, and being responsively engaged, which brings the richness of our lives, because it's through that more doors open to us. Whereas if we're holding ourselves together, if we're feeling overwhelmed, if we're feeling I can't cope, then that becomes a sort of separative experience in which we're looking at the world trying to check out, what are you up to? What do you want from me? Do I want to do this? So a huge amount of computation is going on, relying on concepts and memories to try to work out, is this the right thing for me? How shall I proceed? And of course, it's too complex to work out. Actually, we find our way in through the generosity of giving ourselves to the situation, which is why states of anxiety, fear of humiliation, fear of shame, self-preoccupation, pride, absorption in memories, are all factors which reduce our capacity to be part of what is emerging. So in Buddhist language, they talk of that in terms of non-duality. Non-duality simply means that we are always part of the world. We are en-worlded. We don't start from inside ourselves as a separated individual, an autonomous subject who then scans the world for options, reviews them in a very rational way, comes to a conclusion, and then enacts our decision. Certainly, we don't do that in Scotland. Because we find ourselves caught up in something. Life is happening because we are part of life, and once we start with the sense of being a separate subject, there's a lot to work out. And once you relax and you find your way into being part of what's going on, it gets much easier. So, in Buddhism, there are various explanations as to why we find ourselves in this state of separation and isolation. And they're quite useful, I think, to think about. We all experience thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions arising. They arise in our mind and then they pass. What status do they have? They're a kind of showing, and then they're gone. They don't really establish anything. It's like watching models on a catwalk. They strut down, and then they do a twirl, and then they strut back again. And they just show. They show the dress, they show how it hangs, and so on. And in a sense, there's nothing to get. It was a showing. You see, and you get an impact, an aesthetic impact, you like or you don't like, something's evoked in that seeing, but there's nothing really to hang on to. And certainly if the dress is costing £20,000, you won't be hanging on to it. In the same way, thoughts, feelings, memories arise in our mind. They show themselves, they do a little twirl, and then they're gone. When there is attachment or clinging to the thought, when you get the building up of conceptual identification, the dynamic movement of the actual moment of perception is covered over by the sense that my concepts are referring to something stable. So I look out the window and I see the fir tree again. It's the same fir tree I was looking at earlier. That is a concept. The fact is, the sun is moving in the sky, the thickness of the clouds is variable, and so the amount of illumination on what I call the tree is changing. So what is revealed as the tree is variable and unreliable. That is to say, my embodied aesthetic experience of what is there. Very nice. A gentle way to be reminded. My actual experience of the tree is changing, but my concept of the tree as being there, of course it just looks a bit different. The sun's moving across the sky, of course that's the case, but it's the same tree. And that would be our normal assertion. It may look different, but it's the same. That is to say, we take the concept that there is an enduring tree, which is always the same however it looks. That is to say, we're speaking of an essentialized tree, some essence in the tree which endures as itself, irrespective of how it looks. We take that to be true, and its appearance to be the mere happenstance of how the sun is or the clouds are. Now, from the Buddhist point of view, that is madness. What you actually have is the immediacy of being present with what arises for you as this moment. And the concepts that you use to make sense of what is going on actually act as a barrier between you and the aesthetic moment. So aesthetic appreciation, which is an unprotected openness to the immediacy of what's arising, becomes veiled when we attempt to make sense of what is going on. So who is the one who is making sense of what is going on? I am. And who am I? Well, I am my history, I am my knowledge bank, I am sets of tendencies and so on. This is our normal way of thinking about who we are. So all that we know, all that we are interested in, become the resources whereby we apprehend what is there. There's something that empowers me to make definite statements about what is happening. But of course, what is happening is changing moment by moment. And the subject, I, me, myself, is also changing. For each of us, since we came into this room, we have had thousands of experiences. You've experienced your body, your posture, sometimes your breathing. You might suddenly be aware of your legs. If you're uncomfortable, you might not have much sense of your legs at all if you're comfortable. You hear things, you might go off on a riff of your own thoughts about what you're hearing and so on. There are many pulsations going on. What's to be gained here? What's this for? It's an experience together. It arises and it passes. It arises and it passes. Yeah, but I want to get something to take away. I mean, I've come here, you know, I must learn something useful. What will we get? We get some idea or some concept. The concept stays in your mind for 5 minutes. You go out the door and you're thinking about shopping or what you're going to have for lunch. And then after a couple of weeks, you think, oh, what did I do that weekend? Oh, yeah, now I remember. And that's the problem of apprehending the world through concepts. They arise and they pass. No concept sits in the mind for more than a few seconds. The most basic, simple experience of meditation reveals to us that the content of our mind is ever shifting. And so the idea that we'll get the one true concept, we'll suddenly understand, and now we'll have the golden key that will illuminate the meaning of life, this is probably an illusion. Because every thought vanishes. So if the meaning of life or the truth of existence is a thought, our life is going to be pretty meaningless because the meaning will vanish. Now, can we find a meaning which is not like that? When we exist as a subject in a field of objects and we're aware of our selective attention, of how we're building up pictures of how other people are or what the day seems like, there is a movement of, if you like, the object aspect of the world, what is revealed through our senses, And there is the movement of what we might call the mental aspect, our thoughts, memories, and so on. And these two aspects are dancing together. There's this ceaseless pas de deux of seeming object and seeming subject, and their configuration, their movement together creates this world and this world and this world. But as with any dance performance, you require to have some kind of stage or some kind of venue. Where is this drama being enacted? We're here. We're all in the room anyway. Our bodies are here. That's what we would think. We look around. We have some thoughts about being here and whether it's enjoyable or not enjoyable or whatever. We have some commentary. We look, and we're aware of looking. We think, and we can be aware of thinking. I know that I am thinking. So there is, as it were, the thinker and the one who is aware of the movement of the thought. You've got the substance of what is arising and passing in your mind, and yet this movement is illuminated by as the flow of experience by a kind of lucidity or clarity. I'm aware I've been sitting for a while. Now, is that awareness a concept? Is it a metacognition, a thought about a thought? Or is it something different? One of the functions of meditation is to have a direct clarity about this. Because if it's simply a thought about a thought about a thought, you have a kind of infinite regression into more and more subtle thoughts, each of which will be impermanent. But we have a sense, well, we've all been in this room now for an hour or so. Many things have happened, some of which we can remember, some of which we can't. But there's a basic sense of being here-ness, which is, I would suggest, prior to the specifics of the emergent contouring of the moment. So many things have occurred, and they have occurred for me. I seem to be the one who is registering the occurrence of these events. But who is this me? Me it's almost like a Janus function, as if there are two faces. There's the facing towards the patterning of manifestation, and there's the facing towards the stage. In the room, there's a small stage at the end. It's a blank stage at the moment. Nothing is happening on the stage. If some performers were to come in, they would be moving around and we would be looking at what their bodies are doing or what their voices are saying. They would be doing it on the stage, but we would tend to take the stage for granted. The stage doesn't seem very interesting. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak. Whereas the performers are moving and speaking and dancing and connecting, and they stir up some kind of responsiveness in us. We have hopes and fears, enjoyments and disappointments and so on in relation to this performativity. So this is one aspect of our attention, of giving ourselves into the receptivity of experience and our response to the experience. But this image of the dancers would indicate that we take the stage for granted. You look at the performers, and it is as if the stage doesn't exist. So, in Gestalt psychology, they would say, well, this is the issue of the figure and the ground. So you have a field of experience, within which everything is occurring, and in the facticity of its occurrence, it has equal status. But somehow, our attention is caught by one feature or one factor in a particular moment, and that factor or person becomes foreground. And if we focus our attention on that person, everything else seems to recede into the background. So it's as if we're pulling elements of the world up and making them important, and others are relegated into the background. Nothing is actually moved. The world is as it is, but we've locked onto the significance of one thing, and everything else is falling away. This is the mind. This is not us doing something to the world. This is the play of the mind, which is editing and pulling forward and pushing away. And the key thing, which is ceaselessly receded into the background, is the facticity of the stage. We come into the room and we look around, we see the lamps, we see there's a little kind of gallery up there. We're probably not very attentive to the floor. There's a lot of wood on the floor, there's a lot of different planks, but we don't get down on our hands and knees and start comparing and contrasting the patterns on the wood. The floor is just the floor. Floors, you walk on them. You don't bow to them or kiss them. They're just floors. But, oh, the rest of the room's quite interesting. In the same way, the mind itself, awareness, which is the ground of our experience, or you could say the mother of our experience, is taken for granted. It's just something which can be ignored because what attracts our attention is the pulsations of the patterns of what's arising. So another way of saying this is the mind is like space. In the space of the mind, experience arises as movements, some of which we call subject, some of which we call object. It is the movement which attracts our attention. And when we have no sense of the inseparability of the space and the movement within it, space is disregarded and our focus is on the movement. So the movement would be, for example, the experience of different people in this room. Who are they? How will I speak to them? What will I do? We start to formulate our identifications and our responsiveness, which creates a particularity of our experience, which then feeds into the next moment of particular experience, and the next moment, and the next moment, as it's one thing after another. None of which would be revealed but for the spaciousness of the mind. People talk about being overwhelmed. Sometimes if you have a bad day at work, you think you've had it up to here. I don't want to hear another word. Leave me alone. I need a bit of quiet time. Because you get filled up. Then you relax a little bit, and then maybe you can enter into a conversation with someone. But at a certain point, you feel full. What is that fullness? I can't cope anymore. Would you like me to make you a cup of tea? That would be nice. Oh, so you can cope with drinking a cup of tea. When you've got to your absolute limit, there's always something, like good chocolate, that could be added to the mix. There's always more. It's just I've had enough of this bit. I'd like another pattern, please. When we think I've had enough, it is as if I am a container, I have a fixed capacity, and if too much is given to me, I can no longer contain or even integrate what is occurring. But that is a positioning that we've got locked into a particular situation. And if our perception of the context shifts, we can enter into new formulations. What you've got there is a pattern congruence, a meeting of patterns, which has got locked into a kind of stasis. You're stuck because you don't want to hear any more about the problems at work, or you don't want to kind of worry about your kids not doing their homework, whatever it would be. You think, enough, just enough. And what we're really saying is, enough of that. Enough of that. Something else would be quite nice. But somehow, because we've got a bit obsessed and we're worrying, it is as if that is all there is. And so we can't free ourselves from it. So if you have the sense that the mind is space, how come it's arising as a particular shape which can feel overwhelmed, that can feel at its limit? This is a patterning of experience which is arising. So you might be a bit tired about hearing of the various shenanigans of the new American president. Just don't want to hear that name again. But you're quite open to thinking about other things. So certain factors, if they come into our mind, they can feel heavy or draining or toxic, and enough's enough. Can't be doing with this. Can't make any sense of it. This is a constellation, a meeting together of your subjective responsiveness in relation to what you take to be the continuing qualities of some object formation. You've got a locked engagement, but there's a lot else that's going on. And when we get overwhelmed, when we get trapped and feel unable to do anything more, this is a sign that we have become decontextualized. The world is always big. Even if horrible things are happening, if somebody you love leaves you, the blackbird's still singing. I don't care about the fucking blackbird. But the blackbird's singing. If there was space for the blackbird, your heart would start to get better. But because you kill off the blackbird, you sit in your own grief, in your misery, in your bitterness and resentment. This shouldn't have happened. And this is very, very interesting. That the welcome of the world and the welcome of the mind, if they meet together, if we have an open, spacious awareness, the richness of the world becomes a kind of self-rectifying, self-balancing movement. And that even when you have dark moments, they are inseparable from the bright moments. But when we go into this figure ground constellation and we focus only on the dark moment and all the good seems to have receded, this is our own mental activity. The good is always still there. The robins are bopping about, the lights shimmering on some of the dewdrops on the tree. There are moments of beauty, but we blind ourselves to that because of our fixation, which, I'm sure many of you know, in Buddhism, they're always talking about attachment. Our attachment operates on several levels. The first level of attachment is attachment to reification. That is to say, attachment to the idea that there are real separate things, and these things are determined by their own internal self-definition. A tree is a tree, a car is a car. There is a truth to that. We have an attachment to the idea of an inherent self-nature. The tree is a tree because it's a tree, because it possesses treeness. Now, of course, the roots of the tree are in the earth. The water and the minerals and so on are rising up through the little tendrils on the roots, up through the trunk and through the leaves and so on. There's photosynthesis. So there's a conversation with the sky, with the air, with the sun, and there's a conversation with the earth. So the tree is actually a mode of conversation. A tree is connectivity. Tree is movements of energy up and down. It's a ceaseless flow of interactions of chemicals, of the sap rising, and so on. That is to say, a tree is dynamic. When we look at it and we say, it's a tree, it was there when we arrived, we make a kind of thingness to the tree. We look at the tree, foreground. What has gone into the background? The earth. We just see the tree. If the tree wasn't planted in the earth, it would fall over. When the big wind comes, it blows it over and tears the roots. The tree falls down. The tree and the earth exist together. The tree's not a sort of optional extra. The earth isn't an optional extra. There is a co-emergent or a mutuality or a relatedness, an inseparability of earth and tree. This building sits on its foundations. The foundations sit on the hill. The hill sits on the various layers of material in the earth. Everything is linked together. But when we impute, when we imagine a true separate essence to phenomena, it allows us to take out our little scissors and cut shapes around these things and talk about a tree as if it was just a tree, a motor car as if it was just a motor car. The motor car is on the road. That's where they are. When the car starts up, it goes down the road, and it's influenced by the number of potholes there are on the road, by the behavior of other car drivers and so on, whether there's ice or not, whether there's morning mist or not. A car is always somewhere in conversation with its environment, just as our birds and just as we are. We are all already in the world as aspects of the world, moving, expanding and contracting in relation to the pulsations of the world around us. Now, this doesn't mean we don't exist. Clearly we're here. What it means is we don't exist as monads, as isolated, separate, autonomous entities. We're breathing in and out, we're drinking and eating, we're excreting and so on. So our bodies are flows of experience interrelating with the environment. If we stop breathing, we die. If the tree's roots are cut off, it will die. That is to say, the world is communication. Communication between emergent moments of formation or patterning. And these are ceaselessly occurring. This is what our life is. And we probably get more out of life the more we can be connected to other people's energy formations. That is to say, if we give ourselves into being participants in the world. If we don't start from inside our head, but we move out to meet and to connect, to offer and to receive, which is the mutuality of life. Now, we know this on a very direct embodied level, that the out-breath and the in-breath are balanced. It really helps if they're balanced. Because if somebody has a very shallow in-breath and is breathing out in a long way, they're going to have some disturbance set up. The systolic, diastolic movement in the heart comes into a balance. Balance is the kind of main factor for the continuity of our harmonious relatedness with other people. So we can probably all remember times in our lives where we didn't want to meet other people, where we felt shy or ashamed or downhearted, and the thought of meeting someone else's face just felt too much. I don't want anyone to see me. So it's very interesting to recall these moments of the inability to feel part of what is going on. We feel cut off. We might just want, as a teenager, to stay in your bedroom and not go and meet people because you don't know what to say, and you don't want them to comment on how you are, and you don't want anyone to ask how you're doing because you don't know what you would say. I can only enter into the world if I can define myself, because otherwise I feel too vulnerable to other people's definitions. And this is a very important developmental experience. All children encounter the probably unintended violence of big people commenting on small people. Oh, you've grown a lot. Have I? How do you do growing? This is something which is happening for the child in a simple way, but once you comment on it, it's as if you're imputing some agency to the person, some responsibility, which then carries some moral aspect to it. And so, am I doing it the right way? Right, wrong, good, bad. Children very, very often don't want unnecessary comments on their life because it's objectifying. And when children are playing by themselves, it's manifest that there is a self-forgetfulness in that there's a giving of themselves into the game. And I think that's a very good model for us in our lives, not to start from a fixed position, but to allow the reception of the world to, as it were, take us out of ourselves towards the world. It is self-isolation as an entity, which from the Buddhist point of view is the root of all our difficulties. This is called ignorance, and it means ignoring the fact that we are always already part of the world, that our existence requires the presence of other people who make our clothes, who grow our food, and who look us in the eye, who listen to our stories, and so on. We come into being from in relation to other people, just as all living things do. All plants require some sort of soil, or some sort of place for the roots to expand, and they need light and a proper temperature according to their own qualities. And we are the same. We need people to relate to us. So it's not that the other is an optional extra. We are already in the world with others, and these others are not so different from us. But when we imagine that we are internally defined and that there's a kind of circle of separation around us, then we're always having to step over the threshold towards the other person. But if I step towards you, how will I know whether you like me or not? So I'm now trying to work out how should I be in order to relate to you. But I only know the you for me. I only know my sense of you. What you're thinking, I will never know. So when we become anxious and we're trying to prepare how we should be, we're actually in an endless labyrinth of our own thoughts, trying to relate to other people as if the image in our mind about them was exactly who they were. And this force leads us to more and more isolation. So, from the Buddhist point of view, ignorance means ignoring the ground of our being, which is the openness of the mind, which is the stage or the site or the fecundity, the rich creative potential of whatever is arising. Everything is the mind. Now that doesn't mean that I myself am creating the whole world. What it means is the only world I have access to is my world. I cannot know what you see. If we go and have a cup of tea, I cannot know how the tea tastes for you. Even if we have a stopwatch and we dip our tea bags at exactly the same time and take them out after 2 minutes and we think the tea has equal strength, what it tastes like for you, I won't know. And I say, what's your tea like? Well, it's okay. Well, incredibly informative. Is it delicious? Yeah, it's okay. It's very difficult for us to describe our experience because the aesthetic immediacy of the world is beyond apprehension. It's not a thing. You're there, you drink the tea, There's nothing to do with it. The description you give of it is not it. Representation is always a lie. And we live in a world of endless representations, of images about something, of stories about something. But the immediacy of the taste of the tea in your mouth is what you get. That's your world. How you see the tree, how you see the cars, how you see the people who are here. So here we have one of the great mysteries, that in some ways we share the world, and yet we each have our unique individual take as we participate in the world. It's not that there is no objective world at all. It's not a kind of idealistic philosophy like Bishop Berkeley's, as if we're each hallucinating the world. Clearly, we are in a place in the countryside, and we got here, so we are located in a particular environment, and we will move out of the environment. But what is it that defines our being here? It's our interpretation. The actuality of the immediacy of experience is inexpressible. It's just, it's impactful, but you can't catch it because it has no essence. And simultaneously, as the world reveals itself, we respond with our thoughts, feelings, memories, and so on. And when these two streams merge together, we get the formation of our particular patterning of engagement in the moment. In the tradition, this is called the inseparability of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom is when we see the emptiness of all phenomena. That is to say that in their immediacy, when they're not mediated by our thoughts and interpretations, there is a freshness which is so vital. What would you do? And yet, as we engage with that freshness, we have the particularities of our manifesting which link us to other people, and that's our compassion. We come into gestures of connectivity which have interpersonal impact, but nothing's established. Nothing is established. Because when we become more aware of our existence, we see, I am a flow of arising and passing experiences, of phenomena of taste, smell, backache, anxious thoughts about what I'm going to do on Monday because I've got some papers to fill in on time and so on. All of these factors create a particular pattern, and all of these factors are impermanent. So there is a basic ungraspability to our existence as it is, but if we rarefy our experience, if the anxiety of not knowing how it's going to be leads in an anxious vibration to the need to attach, to hang on, like a drowning sailor grasping onto a piece of driftwood, we hang on to concepts as if they were going to guarantee our existence. Today is Saturday. So, Saturday arises in the mind, and then we think of something else. So, what day is it? It's Saturday. So, you hang on to Saturdayness for 3 seconds of relief. Then you need to hang on to something else, then you need to hang on to something else. So we have this, the creativity of the mind becomes solidified as an endless stream of signifiers, each of which becomes like some kind of tendril, and we end up like Tarzan swinging through the jungle from one moment to another, trying not to fall onto the ground, because we're holding on to something. We are constructing our world. This is a lot of effort. This is really, really hard work, which is why this process of endlessly constructing our existence is called samsara. Samsara means revolving, going round and round from one moment to the next moment, from one realm, one potential formation to another, and we can't stop because our mind is dynamic. There is no fixity to the content of the mind. And therefore, if we're trying to hold on to something, all that is available for us to hold on to are transient phenomena. So you get a purchase on one, and then onto another, and onto another. So it's a bit like scree running. There's a mountainside with small slate scree, and as soon as you step on it, it starts to slide, and you've got to run at an upward angle in order to keep on the horizontal, because the ground keeps slipping away from you. And if we look back over our lives, that's what's happened. We went to school. Now school's finished. You might have gone to college. That's finished. You might have had a particular job or a relationship, and that's gone. So these little houses that we built were merely delusional bubbles that we occupied for a while, and then they burst. Then you need to have something else to hang on to and something else to hang on to. So from the Buddhist point of view, reliance on transient phenomena as a means of having security is clearly not a good idea. You will not get stability from relying on moving factors. Moving factors will give you movement. And movement's pretty good because it makes our lives rich and interesting. If you want stability, you have to attend to the mind itself, which we can translate as being, or the original quality of our mental presence. And we'll take a break now, and then we'll start to look at the ground nature of the mind itself and do some practice to help us align ourselves with what is already there.